Today I want to share with you a story about salvation, about the kind of bone-deep thirst that comes not just from the desert sun, but from wandering alone through a world that has forgotten how to see you as human. It is a story about a woman named Nasha, and the day she found a dying man who would teach her that the strongest walls we build are not around our homes, but around our hearts. The Chiricahua Mountains in late August are a merciless place. It is a land where the sun doesn't just shine, it hammers the earth like a blacksmith working iron, relentless and unforgiving. And on this particular Tuesday, that hammer was beating down on a man who had no business being there. The air shimmered with heat, thick with the scent of creosote and the sharp metallic tang of sun-baked stone. Ezra Brennan stumbled across the sand, his boots sinking into earth that felt like it was trying to swallow him whole. He was 47 years old, with hands that had once shaped iron in the cool green hills of East Tennessee. But now those hands were blistered, cracked, and currently clutching the reins of a horse that had just gone lame. The animal had stepped into a prairie dog hole 2 miles back, and Ezra had been walking ever since. His canteen had run dry an hour ago, maybe two. Time moves strangely in heat like this, stretching and compressing like molten glass. He wiped his face with a hand that came away wet with sweat and grit. The world tilted slightly. He blinked hard, trying to focus, but the horizon kept shifting, dancing like flames. "Come on," he whispered to himself, his voice a rasp in the dry heat. "Just a little further." Sarah needs you, his sister. 18 years old with blonde hair and blue eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Gone 6 months now, taken by men who saw women as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. The trail had led him here, to this godforsaken stretch of desert, following whispers and half-truths from town to town. He took another step. His boot caught on a rock. The world spun, and suddenly he was falling, the ground rushing up to meet him. His head struck stone, a bright burst of pain that turned the world white for a moment. When his vision cleared, he was lying on his back, staring up at a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Blood trickled down his temple, warm and sticky. He tried to sit up, but his arms wouldn't obey. The heat pressed down on him like a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. In the distance, he thought he saw movement, a shadow, or maybe a vulture. He couldn't tell anymore. "Lord," he breathed, the prayer slipping out before he could stop it. "I came all this way. Don't let me die before I find her." The only answer was the wind, hot and dry, whispering through the sage. And then a different sound. Footsteps. Soft, measured, moving across the sand with a purpose that seemed impossible in this heat. Ezra turned his head, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his skull. Through the haze of sun and blood, he saw a figure approaching. Tall, dark hair, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of someone who belonged to this land in a way he never would. The figure knelt beside him, and Ezra found himself looking up into a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. A woman, her skin was the color of burnished copper, her hair black as a raven's wing and tied back in a long braid. A scar ran from her left cheekbone down to her neck, 3 parallel lines that looked like the claw marks of some gritted predator. Her eyes were dark, steady, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Am I dead?" Ezra managed to croak out. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. The woman tilted her head, and a slight curve touched her lips. "Not yet," she said. Her voice was low, accented in a way he couldn't place. "But you will be if you don't drink." She pulled a leather canteen from her belt, unscrewed the cap with practiced efficiency, and brought it to his lips. Ezra drank. The water was warm, tasting faintly of sage and leather, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. It ran down his throat, bringing life back to a body that had been shutting down cell by cell. "Slow," the woman said, pulling the canteen back. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Ezra nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as she examined the wound on his head with clinical detachment, her fingers surprisingly gentle as they probed the edges of the cut. "Shallow," she said. "You'll live." She reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a strip of cloth. Before he could protest, she poured water over it and pressed it to his forehead. The coolness was shocking, almost painful. "Who are you?" Ezra asked. The woman sat back on her heels, her gaze never leaving his face. Someone who doesn't leave men to die in the sun, she said. Even white men. There was an edge in the way she said it, bitterness mixed with defiance. Ezra realized with a clarity that cut through the fog in his brain that this woman was Apache. He had heard the stories. Everyone had. Tales of savagery and violence, of massacres and revenge. But looking at her now, all he could see was someone who had chosen mercy when she could have chosen to keep walking. Thank you, he said. She nodded once, a sharp dip of her chin. Can you stand? Ezra tried. The world tilted dangerously, and he would have fallen if she hadn't caught him. Her grip was iron, her arms supporting him with a strength that surprised him. She was tall, nearly as tall as he was, and lean in the way of people who spent their lives working with their hands. My horse, he started. Lame, she said. I saw it a mile back, left it in the shade with water. You can retrieve it tomorrow, if you live through tonight. That should have frightened him. Instead, it made him want to laugh, the absurdity of it all. Coming west to find his sister, only to be saved by a woman he'd been taught to fear. But the laughter died in his throat when she started walking, half carrying him across the sand. Where are we going? He asked. My home. Redstone Trading Post, 2 miles north. The way she said it made it clear that arguing would be pointless. Ezra had no strength to argue anyway. They walked in silence. Or rather, she walked, and he stumbled alongside her, leaning heavily on her shoulder. The sun beat down on them with relentless fury, and more than once, Ezra felt his knees start to buckle. Each time she steadied him, her grip never faltering. You're strong, he said at one point. The words came out slurred, and he realized dimly that he might be more hurt than he thought. I have to be, she replied. There was no pride in her voice, just fact. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they crested a small rise, and Ezra saw it. The trading post. It sat in a shallow valley, a low adobe structure the color of rust, with a thatched roof and small windows. Gourds and squash grew in a tidy garden beside it. A large wooden barrel sat near the door, catching runoff from the roof. Smoke rose from a clay oven in the yard. It looked like home. Not his home, but someone's. A place carved out of the wilderness through sheer force of will. The woman helped him inside, and the coolness hit him like a blessing. The thick adobe walls kept out the worst of the heat. She guided him to a woven mat on the floor and lowered him onto it with surprising gentleness. Rest, she said. I'll bring water and food. Before he could thank her again, she was gone, disappearing through a doorway into what he assumed was a kitchen. Ezra lay back, his head swimming. He looked around the room. Pelts hung on the walls, expertly tanned and stretched. Bundles of herbs dangled from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a sharp, clean scent. Tools lined one wall, everything from knives to awls to what looked like bone needles. But it was the small altar in the corner that caught his attention. A photograph sat there, surrounded by candles and offerings of corn and tobacco. A man, patchy like the woman, handsome with strong features and kind eyes. He wore traditional dress, and a smaller photograph beside it showed a boy, perhaps 5 years old, with the same dark eyes. The way they were positioned suggested memorials. She's lost everyone, Ezra realized, like me. The woman returned carrying a clay bowl and a clean cloth. She set them down beside him and gestured to the bowl of water. Clean yourself, she said. I'll make food. She turned to leave, but Ezra found his voice. Wait, your name. I should know the name of the woman who saved my life. She paused in the doorway, her back to him. He thought she wouldn't answer. Then she looked back over her shoulder, and in the dim light of the room, her scar seemed to catch the lamplight like a brand. Nasha, she said. And you are? Ezra. Ezra Brennan. She nodded as if committing it to memory. Then she was gone again, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the blessed coolness of the adobe walls. Ezra washed his face and hands as best he could, wincing as the water stung the cut on his forehead. The cloth came away red with blood and brown with dirt. He felt almost human again. Almost. From the other room he heard the sounds of cooking, the scrape of a pot, the snap of kindling. He closed his eyes just for a moment, and when he opened them again, she was back, holding a bowl that smelled better than anything he'd eaten in months. Corn mush with rabbit, she said, setting it in front of him. Not fancy, but it will give you strength. Ezra took the bowl, his hands shaking slightly. He looked up at her, this woman who had every reason to leave him to die but hadn't. It's perfect, he said. She sat down across from him, her own bowl in her hands. For a few minutes they ate in silence. The food was simple but good, seasoned with herbs he didn't recognize. He found himself eating with an appetite he hadn't felt in months. It's not poison, Nasha said suddenly, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. I'd have left you in the desert if I wanted you dead. Ezra looked up, surprised, and found her watching him with what might have been a smile. Fair point, he said, and despite everything, despite the pain and the exhaustion and the desperate quest that had brought him here, he laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but it was real. And for the first time since his sister had been taken, Ezra felt relief break through the despair. Don't sound so surprised, Nasha said. Apache women cook better than white women. I didn't mean to imply otherwise, Ezra said quickly. I know, she said. I'm teasing. The matter-of-fact way she said it made him realize that this was her version of an olive branch, an attempt at connection in a world that had taught them both to be wary of strangers. They finished eating in a comfortable silence. When the bowls were empty, Ezra set his aside and looked around the room again. His gaze fell on a workbench in the corner, where various tools lay scattered. Among them was a hunting knife with a cracked handle, the wood split down the middle. Your knife, he said, pointing. Handle's cracked. I can fix it. Nasha followed his gaze, then looked back at him with surprise written on her face. You're a craftsman? Blacksmith, Ezra said. From Tennessee. My father taught me. His father taught him. It's all I know. He stood up, swaying slightly, and made his way to the workbench. From his pack, which Nasha had brought in from outside, he pulled out a small hammer, some steel wire, and a file. For the next 10 minutes he worked. His hands, despite everything, remembered the movements, wrapping the wire around the handle, tightening it, filing down the rough edges. The familiar rhythm of it steadied him, gave him focus beyond the heat and the fear and the crushing weight of his failure to find Sarah. When he was done, he held up the knife. The handle was secure, the wire wrapping tight and even. He tested it, flexing the blade. Solid. He turned to find Nasha watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She took the knife from him, examining his work with the eye of someone who knew quality when she saw it. Good work, she said finally. Better than the trader in town. There was approval in her voice, grudging but real. If you need anything else fixed, Ezra started, but she cut him off. Why are you here? In the desert. Alone. The question hung in the air between them. Ezra could have lied, should have lied maybe, but there was an openness about this woman, about the way she had saved him without asking for anything in return, that made him tell the truth. Looking for my sister, he said. Sarah, she was taken 6 months ago by men who trade in people. The trail led here. He swallowed hard. I can't go home without her. I won't. Nasha's expression softened just slightly. I'm sorry, she said, and he could tell she meant it. I haven't seen a white girl here, but I've heard rumors. Traders talk. There are mines to the east where young women sometimes end up, not always against their will. Sometimes they're running from something worse. The words hit Ezra like cold water. The possibility that Sarah might have left willingly hadn't occurred to him. But I'll ask around, Nasha continued. The mountains are wide, many places to hide. Thank you, Ezra said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Silence fell between them again, but it was different now. Less wary. More like two people who had recognized a shared loneliness. A shared loss. You lost someone too, Ezra said, gesturing to the photographs on the altar. Your husband and your son. Nasha followed his gaze, and pain flickered across her face. And my son, she said quietly. Both gone. 2 years now. Her voice was steady, but Ezra could hear the weight behind the words. The kind of grief that never really leaves, just learns to live alongside you. I'm sorry, he said. She nodded, accepting his sympathy without comment. Then she stood, brushing invisible dust from her leather skirt. You'll sleep here tonight, she said. Tomorrow, if you are strong enough, we'll retrieve your horse. After that, you're free to go. But what about payment? Ezra asked. For the food, the shelter, The doctoring? I can pay. I have some silver. Nasha looked at him, and there was depth in her eyes, a history he could never fully understand. Keep your silver, she said. You'll need it more than I do. Consider this a debt paid forward. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Now I help you. Before he could respond, before he could thank her properly, the sound of hoof beats shattered the evening quiet. Multiple horses, moving fast. Nasha's hand went to the knife at her belt, the one he'd just fixed, and her entire body went rigid. Stay inside, she said, her voice sharp with command. And she was gone, slipping out the door with the kind of speed that suggested this wasn't the first time trouble had come calling. Ezra ignored her command. He grabbed his own knife from his pack and followed her out into the dying light of day. 3 men sat on horseback in the yard, their faces hard and weathered by sun and malice. The man in the center wore a gray suit that looked ridiculous in the desert heat, complete with a parasol to shade him from the sun. He was older, maybe 55, with silver hair and the kind of face that spoke of wealth and privilege. Nasha stood between them and the trading post, her hand still on her knife, her stance that of a warrior ready for battle. Nasha, the man in the suit said, not bothering to dismount, still stubbornly clinging to this worthless patch of dirt. I see. My dirt, Hardwick, Nasha replied, her voice cold as winter. And it has water. That makes it worth more than all your copper. The man, Hardwick, smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Water that could serve hundreds. Instead, it serves one savage woman. He unfolded a map, holding it up so she could see. This land sits on the richest copper vein in Arizona territory. $200,000 estimated value. But we need water. Your water. The only source for 15 miles. Then dig a well somewhere else, Nasha said. We tried, Hardwick said, and now there was an edge to his voice. Hit rock at 200 feet. Your spring is the only one. He leaned forward in his saddle. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider my offer. After that, well, accidents happen in the desert. That was when Ezra stepped forward. The lady said no, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his head. Time for you to leave. Hardwick's eyes swung to him, and Ezra saw surprise there. And who might you be? Her new pet? The 2 men flanking Hardwick laughed, and one of them, a tall man with a scar across his face, let his hand drift to the gun at his hip. I'm the man telling you to get off her land, Ezra said. Tension filled the air like static before lightning. Then Nasha stepped between them, her body a wall between Ezra and the men on horseback. Enough, she said. Hardwick, you have my answer. Go. Hardwick stared at her, his face unreadable. Then he smiled again, that cold, dead smile. 1 week, he said, think carefully. He turned his horse, and the other 2 men followed suit. But as they rode away, one of them, the shorter one with tobacco-stained teeth, looked back. Shame if this place caught fire, he called out. Dry season and all. Touch my home, Nasha said, her voice carrying across the desert, and I'll put an arrow through your eye. The man laughed, but there was nervousness in it. They disappeared over the rise, leaving only dust in their wake. Ezra turned to Nasha. You weren't kidding about the arrow, were you? She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw determination and a promise. No, she said, I wasn't. And standing there in the fading light, with the heat of the day finally beginning to break, Ezra Brennan realized that his search for his sister had just become more complicated. Because this woman, this Apache woman who had saved his life, was now in danger. And leaving her to face it alone was not something he could do. Not after she'd given him back his life. Not after she'd shown him that mercy still existed in this brutal, unforgiving world. The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. And in that moment, standing beside a woman he barely knew, Ezra made a choice. He would stay. At least for a while. At least until he could repay the debt of his life. And maybe, just maybe, together they could stand against the storm that was coming. The desert night came fast and complete in late August. One moment the world was bathed in gold and crimson, the next it was wrapped in indigo shadow. Ezra sat on the stone bench outside Nasha's trading post, his head still throbbing but clearer now than it had been in hours. The cool evening air felt like a benediction after the punishing heat of the day. Inside he could hear Nasha moving about, the quiet efficiency of someone who had lived alone for so long that every movement was deliberate, every action considered. He thought about going back in, offering to help with whatever she was doing, but he sensed she needed this space, this distance. She had saved his life. Yes, but that didn't mean she trusted him. Not yet. So he sat and waited, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast expanse of sky. In Tennessee, the stars had been beautiful, but here they were something else entirely. Fierce, uncountable, like diamonds scattered across black velvet by some careless hand. You should sleep, Nasha said from the doorway. He hadn't heard her approach, and that unsettled him. Tomorrow will be hard. We have to retrieve your horse before the sun gets high. Ezra turned to look at her. She had changed from her leather skirt into loose cotton pants and a simple shirt. Her hair still in its long braid. In the lamplight, spilling from inside, her scar looked less like a wound and more like war paint, a badge of survival. Can I ask you something? He said. She regarded him carefully, then stepped out onto the bench beside him, keeping a careful distance. Ask that man, Hardwick. How long has he been trying to take your land? 2 years, she said, ever since his company found copper in the mountains. At first, he offered money, a lot of money. When I refused, he offered more. When I still refused, the threats started. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but Ezra could hear the steel underneath. Small things at first, tools going missing, water barrel cracked, then bigger things, fire in the storage shed, rocks thrown through windows. Why don't you go to the law? The sheriff? Nasha laughed, but there was no humor in it. I did. Sheriff Hollis is a good man, better than most, but his hands are tied. Hardwick owns half the town, employs 300 men. Without proof, without witnesses, what can he do? And you won't sell. No, this land was given to my husband's family by treaty, before the treaties were broken, before the removal, before everything. It's all I have left of him, of our son. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I will die before I give it up. Ezra nodded. He understood that kind of determination, that kind of love that transcended death and became something harder, sharper. It was the same thing that had driven him west, following a trail that grew colder with each passing day. Your sister, Nasha said suddenly, the one you're looking for. What makes you think she's here? Ezra pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, worn soft from being opened and closed 100 times. A drawing, Sarah's face, rendered in careful pencil strokes by a traveling artist the year before she was taken. He handed it to Nasha. She studied it in the lamplight, her expression thoughtful. A woman in Silver City said she saw a girl matching this description 3 weeks ago. Said she was with a group heading east toward the copper mines. Said the girl looked scared but not hurt. Silver City is 2 days' ride from here, Nasha said, and there are 3 mines within a day's journey. Hardwick's is one of them. She handed the drawing back. If she's there, finding her won't be easy. The mines are guarded. Workers aren't allowed visitors. I'll find a way, Ezra said. I have to. Nasha nodded, and understanding passed between them in that moment. They were both fighting battles that seemed impossible, driven by love and loss and the stubborn refusal to surrender. Get some sleep, she said again, standing. Tomorrow we work. She went inside, and after a moment, Ezra followed. She had laid out a bedroll for him in the corner of the main room, far from her own sleeping area. Boundaries clearly established. He appreciated that. He lay down, expecting sleep to come hard after the ordeal of the day, but his mind was racing. The confrontation with Hardwick, the threat hanging over this place. And underneath it all, the gnawing fear that he was running out of time to find Sarah. But eventually exhaustion won. His eyes closed, and he drifted into a sleep haunted by dreams of blonde hair and blue eyes and a voice calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach. When he woke, the sun was already creeping over the horizon, turning the eastern sky the color of fresh blood. Nasha was gone, but she'd left a plate of cornbread and dried meat on the bench beside him, along with a canteen of water. He ate quickly, the food settling his stomach and giving him energy he desperately needed. He found her in the small stable behind the trading post, saddling a paint horse with practiced efficiency. The animal was beautiful, all lean muscle and intelligence, its coat a pattern of brown and white that seemed to shift in the early light. This is Kaya, Nasha said without looking at him. It means older sister. She's carried me safely for 8 years. She'll carry us both today. Ezra approached slowly, letting the horse catch his scent. Kaya regarded him with liquid brown eyes, then snorted once as if making a judgment. She accepts you, Nasha said, and there might have been approval in her voice. That's good. She's a better judge of character than most people. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, Ezra sitting behind Nasha, acutely aware of the warmth of her body, the strength in her back. She guided Kaya with subtle shifts of her weight, hardly needing the reins at all. It was like watching a dance, two beings moving as one. The journey to where he'd left his horse took less than an hour. They found the animal in the shade of a rocky outcrop, right where Nasha had said it would be. The horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Buck that Ezra had bought in Santa Fe, whinnied when it saw him, clearly relieved. Nasha examined Buck's injured leg with careful hands. Not broken, she said. Badly sprained. He'll need rest. 2 weeks, maybe 3. You can keep him in my stable. There's room. I can't ask you to do that, Ezra started, but she cut him off with a look. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference, she stood, brushing dust from her hands. Besides, you'll need to work to pay for his keep. And I have work that needs doing. What kind of work? The kind a blacksmith might be good at, she said. My tools need sharpening. The hinges on the storage shed are rusted through. And if you're staying, we'll need to reinforce the doors and windows. After yesterday, Hardwick will be back. When he comes, I want to be ready. That was how Ezra found himself, 3 hours later, setting up a makeshift forge in Nasha's yard. She had the basics, an anvil, tongs, a leather bellows that needed mending but still worked. The coal was good quality, better than he'd expected to find this far from civilization. He worked through the morning, the familiar rhythm of hammer on metal centering him in a way nothing else could. Nasha came and went, bringing water, watching him work with an intensity that suggested she was evaluating more than just his skills. By midday, he'd sharpened every blade in her considerable collection and was working on new hinges for the storage shed. The heat was building again, that relentless desert sun, but it was different when you were working. Purposeful. The sweat that poured from him felt earned. Nasha appeared at his elbow with a young man in tow. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, with the same copper skin and dark eyes as Nasha, but there was an openness about his face, less scarred by life. This is Tommy Whitehorse, Nasha said. He helps me with the trading post, learns the old ways. Tommy, this is Ezra Brennan. He'll be staying for a while. Tommy studied Ezra with open curiosity. You're the mountain man coach he told me about, the one Nasha found dying in the desert. I wouldn't say dying, Ezra said, but Nasha snorted. You were 2 hours from dead. Don't diminish my rescue. There was a hint of humor in her voice that startled him. Tommy grinned. Coachy says the spirit's broad, you hear. Says you have a part to play in what's coming. Who's Coachy? Ezra asked. Coachy Seinaiche, Nasha said. Elder of our people. He lives in the canyon, 3 miles north. Very wise. Very old. Very prone to seeing omens in everything. She said it fondly, like talking about a beloved but eccentric uncle. Can I watch you work? Tommy asked Ezra, his eyes bright with interest. I've never seen ironwork before. Ezra glanced at Nasha, who nodded. For the next hour, he taught the boy the basics. How to judge the heat of the metal by its color. How to strike true and clean. How to let the hammer do the work instead of forcing it. Tommy was a quick study, his hands steady, his focus absolute. You're good at this, Ezra told him. Natural talent. My father was a silversmith, Tommy said. Before the soldiers came, I remember watching him work when I was small. The way the metal moved under his hands, like it was alive. He paused, and grief crossed his young face. They killed him when I was 7, said he was hiding weapons. He wasn't, just making jewelry. Nasha's hand came down on Tommy's shoulder, gentle but firm. The past is past, she said. We honor them by surviving, by keeping the skills alive. Tommy nodded, swallowing hard. Then he straightened his shoulders and picked up the hammer again. They worked together until the sun started its descent toward the western horizon. By then, Ezra had repaired the hinges, reinforced the shutters on 2 windows, and started on a new lock for the front door. His head still ached, and his body was screaming from the exertion after yesterday's ordeal. But it felt good, honest, Like maybe he was paying back some small part of the debt he owed. Tommy left as the light began to fade, promising to return in the morning to help with whatever else needed doing. Nasha and Ezra ate a simple dinner of beans and tortillas, sitting on the bench outside and watching the stars emerge. "You're a good teacher," Nasha said. "The boy learned more in one afternoon than I could have taught him in a month." "You could have taught him," Ezra said. "You just don't work with metal." "No, I work with leather and bone and plant fiber. Each craft has its secrets." She was quiet for a moment. "My husband tried to teach me ironwork once. I was terrible at it. Made him laugh." The memory seemed to pain her and comfort her in equal measure. "Laughter is good," Ezra said. "My wife used to laugh at my cooking. Said I could forge a sword that would last 100 years, but couldn't make a decent biscuit to save my life." He smiled at the memory. "She was right, of course. You loved her. Very much. Losing her and the baby, it felt like losing half my soul." He looked up at the stars. "For a time, I thought I'd never feel whole again. Then Sarah was taken, and suddenly I had a purpose, a direction for the grief. It doesn't make it go away, but it gives it somewhere to go." Nasha nodded slowly. "Yes, I understand that. After Chato and our son died, I thought about leaving this place. Going north, maybe. Starting over where no one knew me. But then I realized, if I left, what did they die for? This land is their memorial. Every day I defend it, I honor them. They'll come again," Ezra said. "Hardwick and his men, soon. I know. Let me help. When they come, let me stand with you." Nasha turned to look at him, her gaze steady and questioning. "Why? You owe me nothing. I saved your life, yes, but that debt is paid. You fixed my tools, my shed, my locks. We're even." "Maybe I don't want to be even," Ezra said. "Maybe I want to help because it's the right thing to do. Or maybe," he added quietly, "I'm tired of running toward a future I can't catch. Maybe I need to stand and fight for a present worth defending, even if it's not my own battle." "It could get you killed," Nasha said. "Hardwick doesn't play fair. If you stand with me, you become his enemy." "Then I become his enemy," Ezra said. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Then Nasha extended her hand. Ezra took it, her grip firm and calloused, a warrior's handshake. "Thank you," she said simply. They were about to go inside when the sound of hoofbeats shattered the evening quiet. But this time it wasn't Hardwick and his men. It was a single rider, moving fast, a plume of dust rising in the moonlight. Nasha was on her feet instantly, hand on her knife. Ezra grabbed the hammer he'd been using earlier, the closest thing to a weapon within reach. The rider pulled up hard, the horse dancing sideways. In the lamplight from the trading post, Ezra could see it was a woman. Older, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and skin weathered by years in the sun. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide with fear. "Nasha," she gasped. "Thank God you're here." "Maggie," Nasha said, and Ezra heard surprise in her voice. "What's wrong?" The woman Maggie slid from her horse with difficulty, her legs clearly stiff from hard riding. "It's Hardwick," she said. "He was in my store this afternoon. Buying supplies, rope, kerosene, black powder." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I heard him talking to those McCall brothers. They're planning a strike. Not just threats this time." "What did you hear?" Nasha asked, her voice tight. "They're coming tomorrow night. Not to threaten, to destroy." Maggie grabbed Nasha's arm. "They're going to burn you out, Nasha. Burn the trading post and everything in it. Hardwick said if you won't sell, then there's nothing to sell. He'll rebuild on the ashes." Ezra felt ice slide down his spine despite the warm night air. "How many men?" "At least 6, Maggie said, looking at him with curiosity and relief, as if seeing him there gave her hope. "Maybe more. The McCall brothers and some of the mine workers. Men with nothing to lose and everything to gain if Hardwick wins." Nasha's face had gone very still, the way Ezra imagined it might before a battle. "Thank you for the warning, Maggie. You took a great risk. You saved my daughter from that snake bite 3 years ago," Maggie said, and her voice caught. "When the white doctor said there was nothing to be done, you came with your herbs and your knowledge, and you saved her life. Jenny is alive because of you. This doesn't even begin to repay that debt." She looked between Nasha and Ezra. "You can't fight 6 men alone, 7, Ezra said quietly. There are two of us now. Maggie's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded. Good, that's good, but you'll need more than two. Her jaw set with determination. I'll talk to Sheriff Hollis. Get him out here. And there are others in town who owe Nasha their lives or their livelihoods. People who are tired of Hardwick's bullying. Maybe it's time we all stood together. It's dangerous, Nasha warned. Hardwick has power, money, influence. And we have what's right, Maggie said fiercely. Sometimes that has to be enough. She climbed back on her horse, wincing at the effort. I'll be back tomorrow with whoever I can gather. You two, you fortify this place. Make it a fortress. She rode off into the night, leaving Ezra and Nasha standing in the yard. We have less than 24 hours, Nasha said. Her voice was calm, but Ezra could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand never left her knife. Then we'd better get started, Ezra said. Show me what you have for defense. Weapons, supplies, anything we can use. They worked through the night. Nasha had more than he expected. 2 rifles, both well-maintained, a shotgun, 3 revolvers of various makes, plenty of ammunition, and her own weapons, the traditional ones, a bow with a quiver of arrows, each one perfectly fletched, several knives, a war club that looked ancient and deadly. But more important than weapons was preparation. Ezra reinforced the doors with iron bars he forged in the darkness, the glow of his makeshift forge casting strange shadows across the yard. Nasha filled barrels with water and placed them strategically around the building. Fire was their enemy tomorrow night. Water was their defense. As dawn broke, they stood in the yard, exhausted but ready. The trading post looked different now, harder. The shutters were barred, the doors reinforced. Buckets of sand sat ready to smother flames. It wasn't a fortress, not really, but it was better than it had been. Nasha looked at him, and in the pale morning light, Ezra saw respect in her eyes. Not quite trust, not yet, but recognition. You didn't have to do this, she said. You could have left, gone to look for your sister. I know, Ezra said, but my mother raised me to believe that when you see injustice, you don't walk away. You stand, even if you stand alone. You're not alone, Nasha said quietly. Not anymore. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, Ezra Brennan realized that somewhere in the last 24 hours, this had stopped being about repaying a debt. This had become about defending something that mattered, about standing beside someone who had shown him that strength wasn't just about muscle and metal. It was about heart, about refusing to bend when the world demanded you break. Whatever came tonight, they would face it together. The heat was building again, that relentless August sun. But this time Ezra welcomed it. Let it burn. Let it test them. They were ready. And when the darkness came, when Hardwick and his men rode in with their torches and their hatred, they would find resistance they didn't expect. Not from one Apache woman alone in the desert, but from 2 people who had found, in each other, a reason to fight. The day passed like honey poured from a jar, slow and thick and heavy with anticipation. Ezra worked through the morning heat, his body protesting every movement but his hands steady on the hammer. He fashioned crude but effective barriers, metal spikes that could be driven into the ground around the perimeter, anything that might slow down men on horseback or on foot. Nasha moved through her preparations with the calm efficiency of someone who had faced death before and made peace with it. She checked her bow, tested each arrow for true flight, sharpened her knives until they could split a hair. But more than that, she gathered her medicine. Yarrow for bleeding, sage for cleansing wounds, prickly pear pulp for burns. You expect casualties? Ezra said, watching her work. I expect reality, she replied. Men with torches and guns and hate in their hearts don't come to talk. She looked up at him. If you're wounded tonight, I need to be able to save you. Just as you saved yourself to save me. I didn't save you, Ezra said. You saved me, remember? The faintest smile touched her lips. Then we're saving each other. That's better anyway. It was near noon when Tommy Whitehorse returned, but he didn't come alone. With him was an old man, so ancient he seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains themselves. His face was a map of wrinkles, each line a story, each crease a memory. But his eyes were sharp as obsidian, missing nothing. Kochi, Nasha said, and there was reverence in her voice. You shouldn't have come. It's too dangerous. The old man, Cochise Nietzsche, dismissed her concern with a wave of his gnarled hand. I am 83 years old, granddaughter. I have survived 3 wars, 2 famines, and the death of everyone I ever loved. A few white men with guns don't frighten me. He turned those piercing eyes on Ezra. So you are the mountain man the spirit sent. I'm just a blacksmith looking for his sister, Ezra said. Kochi laughed, a sound like wind through dry grass. Just a blacksmith, he says. Just a man who wanders into the desert to die and instead finds purpose. Just a man who stands with an Apache woman against those who would take everything. There is no just about you, Ezra Brennan. You are exactly where you need to be. He doesn't believe in omens, Nasha said, but there was affection in her voice. Then he is a fool, Kochi said pleasantly, but a useful fool. He pointed at the fortifications Ezra had built. Good work, strong, but you're thinking like a white man. Defense, walls, barriers. He tapped his temple. Apache think different. We think like water. We flow around obstacles. We strike from unexpected places. What are you suggesting? Ezra asked. That when they come tonight, you don't wait behind your walls. You go to them. He gestured to the landscape around them. This land has 1,000 hiding places, 1,000 advantages for those who know how to use them. Let them come to a dark building, wondering where you are. Then strike from the shadows. It's too risky, Nasha said. If we leave the trading post undefended, they will burn it anyway, Kochi interrupted. If you're inside, you burn with it. If you're outside, you can fight back. And maybe if the spirits favor us, you can drive them away before they ever light their torches. Ezra considered this. The old man was right. Sitting inside waiting to be attacked was a defensive position, and defensive positions eventually fell. But attacking, even from ambush, that required knowing the terrain. Understanding the enemy's approach. Where would they come from? He asked Nasha. If you were leading this attack, what route would you take? She moved to the edge of the yard and pointed. There are 3 ways to approach. The main trail from town, which is the easiest but most exposed. The North Canyon, which provides cover but is treacherous in the dark. And the South Ridge, which is longer but gives a view of the entire valley. Which would you choose? The North Canyon, she said without hesitation. Hardwick is arrogant, but his men aren't stupid. They'll want cover. They'll want to get close before we see them. Then that's where we set up, Ezra said. Not at the trading post, in the canyon itself. Tommy spoke up, his young voice eager. I can help. I know that canyon better than anyone. Every rock, every hiding spot. No, Nasha said firmly. You're too young. I'm 16, Tommy protested. In the old days, warriors younger than me rode into battle. These aren't the old days, Nasha said, and her voice had gone hard. And I won't have your death on my conscience. But Kochi raised his hand. The boy is right. In the old days, he would already be a warrior. And perhaps, he said, looking at Tommy with pride, perhaps it's time to stop hiding from what we are. We are Apache. We are survivors. We don't cower. We fight. Nasha looked between the old man and the boy, and Ezra could see the war being fought behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded, but her voice was steel. You stay in the rear. You watch our backs. You do not engage unless there's no other choice. Understood? Understood, Tommy said, standing straighter. The afternoon wore on, and with it came more visitors. First was Sheriff James Hollis, a man in his early 50s with a badge that had seen better days and a face that spoke of too many compromises. But his eyes were honest, and when he looked at Nasha, there was genuine respect there. I can't officially be here, he said, dismounting from his horse. Hardwick would have my badge if he knew. But Margaret Chen came to me this morning, told me what's happening. He looked at the fortifications, at Ezra, at the determination on Nasha's face. I can't stop this, but I can bear witness. And if anything happens, if there are casualties, I can make sure the right people are held accountable. That's more than we expected, Nasha said. Thank you, James. Your father pulled me from a flooded river when I was 10 years old, the sheriff said quietly. Before the wars, before everything went to hell, he taught me that a man's character isn't defined by his skin, but by his actions. He looked uncomfortable, as if the words were hard to say. I'm sorry it took me so long to honor that lesson. Better late than never, Nasha said. An hour later, Maggie Chen arrived with three others. Two were Mexican laborers from the copper mine, brothers named Ramon and Felipe Garcia, who had quit rather than participate in what they called murder. The third was a surprise, a thin white man in his early 20s with consumption evident in his hollow cheeks and the handkerchief he pressed to his mouth when he coughed. "This is Robert Hardwick," Maggie said, and Ezra's hand went to his knife. The young man held up his hands quickly. "I'm not my father," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know what he was planning until yesterday. When I found out, I told him it was wrong. He called me weak, said I was a disappointment." He coughed again, harder this time. "Maybe I am weak, but I won't be part of this." "Why should we trust you?" Ezra asked. Robert reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder. Inside were papers, letters, receipts. "Because I brought proof," he said. "Everything you need to destroy him legally. Records of bribes to city officials. Threats in writing to other landowners. Proof that he ordered the fire at Nasha's storage shed last year." He handed the folder to Sheriff Hollis. "I can testify to all of it." "This could ruin him," Hollis said, leafing through the documents. "With this, I could arrest him tonight." "No," Nasha said. "If you arrest him before his men attack, they'll say it's a conspiracy, that we fabricated evidence." She looked at Robert. "But if we survive tonight, if we have witnesses to what they try to do, then your testimony and those documents become proof of a pattern. Proof that stands up in any court." "You're asking me to let an attack happen," Hollis said. "I'm asking you to let us defend ourselves," Nasha corrected, "and to make sure what happens tonight is documented, recorded, so that when this is over, there's no question who was in the right." The sheriff didn't like it, but he nodded. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, they gathered to plan. 8 people, an unlikely alliance: an Apache woman, a mountain blacksmith, an elder, a boy, a sheriff, a Chinese shopkeeper, 2 Mexican miners, and the son of their enemy. Kochi drew a map in the dirt. "The North Canyon has 3 choke points," he said. "Here, here, and here, places where men on horseback have to slow down, have to move single file. We position ourselves at the first choke point," Nasha said. "Let them get into the canyon, where their numbers mean less. Then we hit them from above." "What about the trading post?" Ramon asked. "If some come from another direction?" "Then the post burns," Nasha said flatly. "It's wood and adobe. It can be rebuilt. Lives cannot." Ezra studied the map. "How many men do we think Hardwick is bringing?" Robert spoke up. "I heard him talking to Jack McCall, 6 men from the mine, the 3 McCall brothers. Maybe 10 total, including my father." 10 against 8, Felipe said. "Better odds than I expected." "But they have guns," Maggie pointed out, "and most of us don't." "I have my bow," Nasha said. 30 arrows. Ezra has a rifle. The sheriff has his revolver. That's 3 ranged weapons. "I can throw rocks," Tommy said. Everyone looked at him. "What? I'm good at it. I can hit a rabbit at 30 yards. Kochi nodded approvingly. "The boy speaks truth. I've seen him. A rock to the head is as effective as a bullet. We need to even the odds before it comes to shooting," Ezra said. He pointed to the first choke point on Kochi's map. "What if we blocked it? Not completely, but enough to force them to dismount. Make them come through on foot, in the dark, not knowing where we are." "How do we block it?" Hollis asked. Ezra smiled grimly. "I'm a blacksmith. Give me 2 hours and I'll give you a barrier that'll stop a cavalry charge." They worked as the light died. Ezra and the Garcia brothers hauled stones and timber to the narrow section of the canyon, building a barricade that looked natural, like a rock slide, but was actually carefully constructed to funnel anyone coming through into a stopping field. They weren't here to murder. They were here to defend. Nasha and Tommy positioned themselves on the high ground, finding spots where the shadows were deepest and the angles were best. Maggie and Robert, neither fighters, would stay at the third choke point with the horses, ready to ride for help if everything went wrong. Sheriff Hollis took up a position where he could see everything, his role as witness paramount. And Kochi, despite his age, insisted on being in the canyon itself, hidden in a crevice with a pile of rocks. "I may be old," he said, but my arm is still strong, and I have 8 decades of anger to throw. As full darkness fell, they waited. The desert night was cold, a shocking contrast to the day's heat. Ezra crouched behind a boulder, his rifle across his knees, and felt every minute stretch like hours. Beside him, 15 feet away and invisible in the darkness, Nasha waited with her bow. The moon was a thin crescent, providing almost no light, perfect for an ambush. Either direction. They came at midnight. Ezra heard them before he saw them, the sound of hooves on stone echoing off the canyon walls. Whispered voices, the clink of metal on metal. Then torches flared to life, a dozen points of flame that turned the darkness into dancing shadows. Ezra counted. 10 men, just as Robert had predicted. Hardwick was there, unmistakable even at this distance, still in his ridiculous suit. The McCall brothers, and 7 others, miners by the look of them, rough men with hard lives and harder prospects. They moved slowly, carefully, clearly not expecting resistance, but wary nonetheless. When they reached the rockslide barrier, they stopped. "What the hell is this?" Jack McCall's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Looks like a slide," one of the miners said. "Recent too. Go around it," Hardwick ordered. "There is no around it, boss. Canyon walls are too steep. We have to go over or go back." "Then go over, you idiots. We don't have all night." The men dismounted, leaving 3 to watch the horses. 7 came forward, climbing over the barrier. Ezra watched them come, these men who thought they were about to commit arson and possibly murder, and felt resolve settle in his chest. Not today, he thought. Not here. Nasha's arrow flew first, a whisper in the darkness. It struck the torch in Jack McCall's hand, knocking it from his grip and plunging that section of the canyon into darkness. Before anyone could react, a second arrow took the torch from another man's hand. "Ambush!" someone shouted, and chaos erupted. Ezra fired his rifle, not at the men but at the ground in front of them, sending up a spray of rock and dirt. The miners scattered, some diving for cover, others running back toward the horses. Tommy's rocks flew from the darkness, striking with surprising force. One caught Cole McCall on the shoulder, spinning him around. Another hit a miner square in the chest, driving the air from his lungs. "Show yourselves!" Hardwick screamed. "You cowards! Show yourselves and fight!" "We're not the cowards," Nasha's voice rang out from the darkness, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You come in the night with torches and guns to burn out a woman alone. Who is the coward, Hardwick?" "You have no right to that land," Hardwick shouted back. "I have every right," Nasha said. "Treaty right, legal right, and most of all, human right. This is my home. You want it? Come take it. But know that every step forward costs you blood." Jack McCall rallied his men. "Spread out, find them. They're just trying to scare us." But the miners were looking at each other, uncertainty clear even in the dim light. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. A quick fire, maybe, while a woman slept. Not a fight in the dark against enemies they couldn't see. Another arrow flew, this one grazing Dutch Keller's arm. He yelped, dropped his gun, and stumbled backward. "I ain't dying for no copper mine," one of the miners shouted and turned to run. 2 others followed him. "Get back here," Hardwick roared. "I'll have you blacklisted from every mine in the territory." But they were gone, scrambling back over the barrier, mounting their horses, disappearing into the night. That left Hardwick, the 3 McCall brothers, and 3 miners who looked like they desperately wanted to follow their companions, but were too afraid of Hardwick's wrath. Ezra stood up then, stepping into the moonlight with his rifle aimed. "That's far enough," he said. "Turn around, go home. This ends now, you," Hardwick spat. "The stranger, you have no stake in this. I have every stake," Ezra said, "because wrong is wrong, no matter who commits it, and what you're doing here is wrong." Jack McCall raised his gun, but before he could fire, Sheriff Hollis stepped into view, his badge catching what little light there was. "Put it down, Jack," Hollis said. "All of you, put down your weapons. This is over." "You have no authority here," Hardwick said, but there was desperation in his voice now. "I have the authority of the law," Hollis said, "and I have 7 witnesses who will testify that you came here with intent to commit arson and possibly murder." He pulled out Robert's folder. "And I have documentary evidence of your crimes. It's over, Cornelius. You're under arrest." Hardwick stood frozen. Then he lunged not at the sheriff, but at his own son, who had emerged from the shadows. "You," Hardwick screamed, "you betrayed me." "I saved you," Robert said quietly, "from becoming a murderer." Hardwick swung, his fist connecting with Robert's jaw, sending the sick young man sprawling. Ezra moved without thinking, covering the distance between them in 3 strides and putting himself between father and son. "Enough," he said. Hardwick turned his rage on Ezra, swinging wildly. But Ezra had been in enough fights, had worked with his hands his whole life. He caught Hardwick's arm, twisted, and brought the man to his knees with leverage alone. "It's over," he said again. And it was. The McCall brothers, seeing their employer subdued and the sheriff with his gun drawn, threw down their weapons. The remaining miners followed suit. In the span of 10 minutes, the fight had gone out of them entirely. They marched the prisoners back to the trading post, a solemn, defeated column. Nasha walked beside Ezra, her bow still strung, her eyes still wary. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for Robert, for stopping his father. No man should have to watch his father become a monster," Ezra said. "I did it for the son, not the father." As they reached the trading post, untouched and whole in the moonlight, Nasha stopped. She turned to face all of them, this unlikely group of defenders. "Tonight," she said, "we stood together, Apache and white, Mexican and Chinese, old and young. We stood for what was right, and we won." Her voice grew stronger. "Remember this. Remember that we are stronger together than apart, that justice has no color, that home is worth fighting for." Kochi stepped forward, his ancient face proud. "The spirits were right about you, mountain man," he said to Ezra. "You were exactly what was needed." "I didn't do anything special," Ezra protested. "You stood," Nasha said, "when you could have walked away, when you could have continued your search for your sister. You stood. That's everything." In the distance, the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. They had survived the night, and in surviving, they had forged a bond stronger than steel, a brotherhood, a chosen family. And as the sun rose over the Chiricahua Mountains, Ezra Brennan realized that while he had come west to find his sister, he had found something else entirely. He had found a reason to stay. The morning sun rose blood red over the Chiricahua Mountains, casting long shadows across men who had not slept. Ezra sat on the stone bench outside the trading post, his rifle still across his knees, watching Sheriff Hollis secure the prisoners. 10 men sat in the dirt, their hands bound with rope, their faces showing everything from defiance to shame. Cornelius Hardwick refused to look at anyone, his expensive suit now torn and dusty, his carefully constructed dignity shattered. The McCall brothers sat together, whispering among themselves, clearly calculating their options. The miners looked like men who had made a terrible mistake and were only now understanding the consequences. Robert Hardwick stood apart from his father, one hand pressed to his jaw where the older man had struck him. Nasha approached the young man with a poultice of herbs, her movements gentle despite the hardness that battle had brought to her eyes. "This will help with the swelling," she said, applying the medicine to his bruised face. He flinched, not from pain but from kindness he clearly didn't expect. "I'm sorry," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion and shame, "for what he tried to do, for what he is." "You are not your father," Nasha said firmly. "You proved that tonight. When the moment came, you chose honor over blood. That takes a different kind of courage." "He disowned me," Robert said, "before the sheriff arrested him, said I was dead to him." "Then you're free," Kochi said, appearing beside them with the silent grace of a man who had spent 80 years moving through difficult terrain. "Free to become who you were meant to be, not who he demanded you be. That is a gift, boy, even if it doesn't feel like one right now." Ezra joined them, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. "Sheriff, what happens now?" Hollis looked up from the rope he was checking on Jack McCall's wrists. "Now we ride to Dos Cabezas. I file formal charges. Attempted arson, conspiracy to commit murder, trespassing with intent to harm." He pulled out Robert's folder of documents. "And with this evidence, we add bribery, extortion, and fraud. Cornelius Hardwick is going to prison for a very long time." "What about the others?" Maggie Chen asked, gesturing to the miners. The sheriff studied them. "That depends. Were you here of your own free will, or did Hardwick coerce you?" One of the miners, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, spoke up. He said if we didn't come, we'd lose our jobs. Said our families would be blacklisted. That we'd never work in this territory again. Hollis nodded slowly. Then you'll testify to that. You'll tell the judge exactly what happened, what he threatened, and you'll serve as witnesses against him. Do that, and I'll recommend leniency. And if we don't, another miner asked, then you go down with him as accomplices, Hollis said flatly. Your choice. Make it now. One by one, the miners agreed to testify, all except Dutch Keller, who sat glaring at Nasha with naked hatred in his eyes. I ain't saying nothing to help no Indian, he spat. She's the one who should be in chains. Coming to this land, taking what ain't hers. Nasha walked over to him, and Ezra tensed, ready to intervene if needed. But she simply knelt down until she was eye level with the man, her scarred face inches from his. My people were here 1,000 years before yours, she said quietly. We named these mountains. We knew every spring, every canyon, every plant that could heal or kill. This land isn't something I took. It's something your people tried to take from me, and failed. She stood. So you can hate me all you want, Dutch Keller, but I'll still be here when you're nothing but dust and a forgotten name. She walked away, leaving the man sputtering with impotent rage. The sun climbed higher, the heat building with it, and they prepared to leave. The Garcia brothers would ride with Hollis to help guard the prisoners. Tommy and Cochi would return to the canyon to spread word among the Apache people that the threat had passed. Maggie would go back to her store to begin the quiet work of shifting public opinion in town. That left Ezra and Nasha at the trading post, suddenly alone after the chaos of the night. You should go, Nasha said, not looking at him. Your sister. You came here looking for her. Now that this is over, you should continue your search. Ezra was quiet, watching the dust devils dance in the morning heat. I've been thinking about that, he said. About Sarah. About what I'd say when I found her. What would you say? Nasha asked. That I came for her because I love her. Because family matters. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. He turned to face her, but somewhere in the last few days I realized something. Sarah was taken 6 months ago. If she wanted to be found, if she needed rescuing, there would have been a trail. There would have been signs. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Robert was telling the truth. Maybe she's at the copper mine of her own free will. Maybe she's not a prisoner, but a person who made a choice. He ran a hand through his hair. And maybe I need to respect that choice, even if I don't understand it. You're giving up? There was concern in Nasha's voice, a softness he hadn't heard before. No, Ezra said. I'm changing tactics. I'm going to go to the mine. I'm going to ask to see her. And if she's there willingly, if she's safe and happy, then I'm going to tell her I love her and that she always has a home to come back to. And then I'm going to let her live her life. And if she's not there willingly, then I'll burn that mine to the ground to get her out, Ezra said with quiet certainty. But I won't assume. I won't charge in like I know better than her what her life should be. Nasha nodded slowly. That is wise. More wise than most brothers would be. My mother raised me to respect that women have their own minds, Ezra said. Even when it's hard, even when I want to protect her from everything. They stood in comfortable silence. Then Nasha spoke again. When will you go? Tomorrow, Ezra said. Today I need to sleep. And tonight, if you'll have me, I'd like to help you repair whatever damage the threat of attack might have done. Check the barriers. Make sure everything is secure. You don't owe me that, Nasha said. I know, Ezra replied. But I want to, if you'll let me. The look she gave him was complex, layers of emotion Ezra couldn't quite read. Yes, she said finally, I'd like that. They were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. A single rider moving fast but not with the aggression of the night before. As the figure came closer, Ezra recognized Tommy Whitehorse, though the boy's face was flushed with excitement rather than fear. Nasha, he called out as he pulled his horse to a stop. Cochi sent me back. He says you need to come to the canyon. There's someone there asking for you. Who? Nasha asked, her hand instinctively going to her knife. A white woman, Tommy said, young. She says her name is Sarah Brennan and she's looking for her brother. Ezra's world stopped. Everything went silent. The wind died. The desert held its breath. Sarah, he whispered. Then louder. Where? Where is she? The North Canyon, Tommy said. Near the third choke point where we were last night. Kochi is with her. He sent me to bring you. Ezra was moving before he consciously decided to, running for Buck, the horse that had carried him into the desert. But Nasha caught his arm. Wait, she said. We don't know if it's really her. It could be a trap. Hardwick has allies we don't know about. It's her, Ezra said. I know it. I can feel it. Then I'm coming with you, Nasha said, just in case you're wrong. They rode hard, Ezra and Nasha on her paint horse Kaya, Tommy racing ahead to guide them. The canyon walls rose around them, red stone carved by wind and time, and Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might break free. When they reached the third choke point, he saw her. Blonde hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold. Blue eyes that he would have recognized anywhere. She was thinner than he remembered, her face showing the strain of hard months, but she was alive. She was whole. Sarah, he breathed fine. She turned, and when she saw him, her face crumpled. Ezra, she cried. And then she was running, and he was sliding from the horse, and they collided in an embrace that drove the air from both their lungs. I thought you were dead, she sobbed into his chest. I thought I'd never see you again. I've been looking for you, Ezra said, his own voice breaking. 6 months. I've been following your trail for 6 months. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. I tried to leave signs. I tried to let you know I was okay, but they moved me so many times, and then when I finally settled, I didn't know how to reach you. Who took you? Ezra asked, his hands on her shoulders, needing to touch her to believe she was real. Who did this? Sarah glanced at Nasha and Tommy, suddenly aware they had an audience. It's complicated, she said. Can we talk? Just us? Nasha nodded. We'll give you space. Come, Tommy. The elder Kochi is waiting. They moved away, but not far, close enough to help if needed, far enough to give the siblings privacy. Sarah looked at her brother, and in her eyes he saw not a victim, but a woman who had lived through difficulty and come out changed. I wasn't kidnapped, Ezra. Not really. What do you mean, not really? You disappeared. You were gone. I left, Sarah said. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I left home because I was drowning there. Because after Anna died, you became someone I didn't recognize. All you could see was your grief. You couldn't see that I was grieving too. The words hit Ezra like a physical blow. Sarah, let me finish, she said. Please, I left because I needed to find my own life. I took a job as a teacher, traveling with a family heading west. But the wagon train was attacked. Not by Indians, by white men, outlaws. They killed the family I was with. They were going to kill me too. She paused, her hand going to her throat as if feeling a blade that was no longer there. But someone saved me. A man named Robert Hardwick. He was traveling to meet his father, and he saw what was happening. He scared them off, claimed I was his wife, traveling with him. He saved my life. Ezra's mind was reeling. Robert. The same Robert who had helped them last night. We traveled together to the copper mines, Sarah continued. I was going to leave, go back home, but then I got to know him, really know him, and I realized he was sick. Consumption. He needed someone, and I had nursing training from helping you with Anna. So I stayed. Not as a prisoner, as a choice. For 6 months, Ezra asked. You've been there for 6 months and never sent word? I sent 3 letters, Sarah said, to our address in Tennessee. Did you not get them? Ezra shook his head slowly. I left Tennessee a week after you disappeared. I've been moving ever since, following rumors and half-truths. I never got any letters. Oh God, Sarah said, fresh tears forming. You've been searching all this time, thinking I was in danger. You were in danger, Ezra said. Those men who attacked the wagon train are dead or in prison now, Sarah interrupted. Robert made sure of it. He spent his own money tracking them down, bringing them to justice. Every single one of them. She looked at her brother. He's a good man, Ezra. Sick, yes, and his father is terrible. But Robert himself is kind and decent and the first person since Anna died who made me feel like I mattered. Ezra sank down onto a rock, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. All this time, all these months of searching, of fear, of desperate hope, and she had been safe, had been making her own choices. "Are you angry with me?" Sarah asked quietly. Ezra looked up at his sister. This girl, no, this woman who had grown up while he wasn't looking. Angry? No. Relieved. Grateful you're alive. He paused. Hurt that you felt you couldn't talk to me, that you had to leave like that. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, kneeling in front of him. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to reach you through your grief, and I was so angry. At Anna for dying, at you for disappearing into your sadness, at myself for needing you and not having you." "I'm sorry too," Ezra said. "You're right. After Anna died, I lost myself. I should have been there for you. I should have seen that you were hurting." They sat together, the silence between them healing rather than painful. "Where is Robert now?" Ezra finally asked. "At the mine," Sarah said, "recovering. Last night took a lot out of him. The consumption gets worse when he's stressed." She looked at Ezra. "He told me what happened, how he stood against his father, how you all fought to protect that woman's land. Her name is Nasha," Ezra said, "and she's the reason I'm alive. I collapsed in the desert 3 days ago. She saved me." Sarah's expression softened. "You care for her." It wasn't a question. Ezra found himself nodding. "I do. I don't know what it is yet, but yes, there's something there." "Then don't let her go," Sarah said. "Life's too short, Ezra. We learned that with Anna. We learned that with everything we've lost. If you found someone who matters, you hold on to them." "What about you?" Ezra asked. "What are your plans?" "Robert asked me to marry him," Sarah said. 3 days ago. I told him I needed to find you first, to make sure you knew I was alive and well, to get your blessing. And now I'm asking," she said. "Will you give it? Will you trust me to make my own choice, even if it means I'm not coming home to Tennessee?" Ezra thought about home, about the empty house that had never felt right without Anna, about the forge that had become a place of memory rather than craft, about what Nasha had said, that home wasn't a place but a choice. "I trust you," he said. "And if Robert Hardwick is half the man he showed himself to be last night, then yes, you have my blessing." He pulled her into another embrace. "Just promise me you'll write real letters to places I can actually receive them. Promise me I won't lose you again." "I promise," Sarah whispered. "And Ezra, you should stay here, in Arizona, near us, start fresh, build something new." "Maybe," Ezra said. "Maybe I will." "How did you find me?" Ezra asked when they finally pulled apart. Sarah wiped her tears. "Robert. After the trial was set, he sent word to every mine, every trading post within 100 miles. He was trying to make amends for what his father had done. Someone in Dos Cabezas mentioned a mountain blacksmith living with an Apache woman. Robert told me immediately. I knew it had to be you." They walked back together to where Nasha, Tommy, and Kochi waited. The old Apache was smiling, as if he had known all along how this would unfold. "Your sister is found," he said to Ezra. "The spirits have answered your prayer, but they have given you more than you asked for, as they often do." Sarah looked at Nasha with open curiosity. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my brother, for giving him a reason to stop just surviving and start living again." Nasha inclined her head. "He saved me too, in different ways, but no less important." "Come back to the trading post," Tommy said eagerly. "We should celebrate, all of us together." They rode back in a group, the morning sun now high overhead, the heat building but somehow more bearable. At the trading post, Maggie Chen had returned with food and news. "The town is buzzing," she announced as they arrived. "Everyone knows what happened last night. An opinion is shifting. Hardwick's people are distancing themselves from him. The mine workers are talking about forming a union, making demands for better treatment. Change comes slowly," Kochi said. "But it comes. Last night was a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples will spread." They ate together, this unlikely family. Stories were told, laughter rang out. Sarah and Robert's story emerged in full, and Nasha listened with the same intensity she brought to everything. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Ezra found himself standing apart from the others, watching them. His sister, alive and whole and happy. Nasha, strong and proud and no longer alone. The community that had formed around a single act of defiance. "You look thoughtful," Nasha said, appearing beside him with that unnerving ability to move without sound. "I'm realizing something," Ezra said. I came west looking for one thing and found something else entirely. I came looking for my sister, for the past, and instead I found a future. What kind of future? Nasha asked, and there was vulnerability in her voice, a softness he hadn't heard before. I don't know yet, Ezra admitted, but I know it's here, in this place. With these people, he looked at her. With you, if you'll have me. As what? She asked. A hired hand? A friend? As whatever you want, Ezra said. I can work metal. I can defend what needs defending. I can learn whatever else you need. I'm not much, but I'm here. And I'm staying, if you'll let me. Nasha was quiet, her gaze steady and questioning. My heart has been closed for 2 years, she said finally, locked away because grief felt safer than hope. I understand that, Ezra said. But standing next to you, she continued, fighting alongside you, watching you reunite with your sister, I felt it crack open. A feeling I thought was dead. She reached out and took his hand. I don't know what this is yet either, but I know I don't want you to leave. Then I won't, Ezra said simply. As the sun set over the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple and red, two broken people stood together and felt for the first time in years, hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hardwick's trial, the work of rebuilding trust with the town, the slow, careful work of opening hearts that had learned to stay closed. But tonight they had this moment, this connection, this proof that even in the harshest desert, even after the longest drought, life could bloom again. And sometimes what you find when you stop searching is more valuable than what you were looking for in the first place. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. The trial of Cornelius Hardwick was set for the first week of September, and the entire territory seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Ezra had settled into a rhythm at the trading post, his temporary stay becoming something that looked increasingly permanent. He'd built a proper forge now, not the makeshift setup from that first frantic day, but a real smithy with a stone hearth and a chimney that drew clean. The sound of his hammer on anvil became as much a part of the desert soundscape as the wind through the sage. Travelers began to stop, not just for Nasha's medicinal herbs and tanned hides, but for Ezra's metalwork. A new knife, a repaired wagon axle, shoes for horses that had crossed too many miles of hard stone. Nasha watched him work with an emotion in her eyes that she hadn't quite named yet. Trust, certainly. Respect, without question. But there was warmth there too, something deeper that neither of them had spoken aloud. Sarah visited twice a week, sometimes with Robert when his health allowed it. The young man was responding well to Nasha's herbal treatments, a combination of traditional Apache medicine and careful nursing that seemed to be working where white doctors had failed. His cough had lessened, his color had improved, and his resolve to testify against his father had not wavered. It was on a Wednesday, 20 days after the attack that never happened, that Sheriff Hollis rode up to the trading post with news written plain on his weathered face. Trial's been moved up, he said, dismounting heavily. Judge Carson wants it handled before the fall circuit. We ride to Tucson tomorrow. Tomorrow, Nasha said, looking up from the leather she'd been working. That's barely any notice. Hardwick's lawyers have been making noise claiming their client is being held unjustly. That evidence was fabricated. Hollis pulled off his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. Judge wants to put this to rest before it becomes a political issue. Half the territory is watching this case. Will the testimonies be enough? Ezra asked, setting down his hammer. With Robert's documents and all of you as witnesses? Hollis nodded. Should be. But Hardwick's hired a lawyer from San Francisco, man named Thaddeus Crowe, known for getting rich men acquitted. He'll twist every word, attack every character. He gestured to Nasha. Especially yours. Let him try, Nasha said coldly. I have survived worse than a lawyer's words. It's not just words, Hollis said gently. Crow will dig into your past. He'll bring up every story about Apache raids, every fear people have. He'll try to make the jury see you as a threat rather than a victim. Then we make sure they hear the truth, Ezra said, not just about what happened that night, but about who Nasha is, about what she's built here. That's why I need all of you to come, Hollis said, not just to testify, but to show the court that this isn't about one woman standing alone. It's about a community standing together. The next morning they assembled at dawn. Nasha rode Kaya, her best clothes packed in saddlebags, her face set with determination. Ezra rode Buck, now fully recovered from his injury. Sarah and Robert came in a small wagon, Robert insisting he was strong enough despite Sarah's worried looks. The Garcia brothers, Ramon and Felipe, rode together, their Sunday shirts pressed and their faces serious. Maggie Chen came in her own wagon, bringing Tommy and two other shop owners from town who had agreed to speak on Nasha's behalf. Even Kochi came, riding a horse that looked as ancient as he was, refusing to be left behind from what he called the most important battle of all, the battle for justice. The ride to Tucson took 2 days. They camped the first night in the shadow of the Rincon Mountains, sitting around a fire that pushed back the desert darkness. Ezra found himself sitting beside Nasha, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Are you afraid," he asked quietly, "of lawyers and judges?" She shook her head. "I've faced cavalry charges and winter starvation and the death of everyone I loved. A courtroom holds no terror for me." "Then what are you feeling?" She was quiet, staring into the flames. "Hope," she said finally, "and that terrifies me more than fear ever could, because hope can be destroyed. Fear you can fight, but hope, once it's crushed, is almost impossible to rebuild." Ezra understood. He'd felt the same way when he'd stopped searching for Sarah and started building something new. The vulnerability of letting yourself believe things could get better. "You won't face it alone," he said. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, we're all there with you." Nasha turned to look at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much? Your sister is found. You could leave. Go back to Tennessee or anywhere else. Why stay in this fight?" "Because it's not just your fight anymore," Ezra said. "Because what Hardwick tried to do, what men like him do every day, taking what isn't theirs, destroying what they can't control, that's wrong, and I'm tired of watching wrong win." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I've come to care about you, more than I expected, more than I probably should given how little time has passed. But there it is." Nasha's breath caught. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My people believe that some connections transcend time, that souls recognize each other across lifetimes. I used to think that was just poetry, stories to comfort the lonely. And now I think maybe the stories are true." She reached out, her calloused hand finding his. "Because I feel it too, this pull, this recognition, like I've been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting." They sat like that, hands clasped until the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. Tucson rose from the desert like a mirage made solid, adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza, church bells tolling the hour as they rode in. The courthouse was the largest building in town, 2 stories of whitewashed stone with a bell tower that could be seen from miles away. Sheriff Hollis met them at the courthouse steps. "Trial starts in an hour," he said. "Judge Carson is fair, but strict. He won't tolerate any disruptions." He looked at each of them in turn. "When you're called to testify, speak clearly, stick to the facts, and don't let Crow provoke you." That's exactly what he wants. "What about Hardwick?" Sarah asked. "Will he be there?" "Chained in the defendant's box," Hollis said, "and not happy about it. He's been demanding to be released on bail, claiming he's a respectable businessman being persecuted." Judge denied it 3 times. They filed into the courtroom as the morning sun climbed higher. The room was packed, every bench filled with spectators who had come to witness what was already being called the trial of the decade. Ezra found himself scanning the crowd, seeing the division written plain on their faces. Some looked sympathetic to Nasha. Others regarded her with naked hostility. A few seemed simply curious, there for the spectacle. Cornelius Hardwick sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit immaculate despite 3 weeks in custody. His lawyer, Thaddeus Crow, was a thin man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. He exuded confidence, the kind that came from winning cases that should have been lost. The judge entered, a stern-faced man in his 60s with white hair and a gavel that cracked like thunder when he called the court to order. "The Territory versus Cornelius Hardwick," he announced. "Charges of attempted arson, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, extortion, and fraud." "How does the defendant plead?" "Not guilty," Hardwick said, his voice steady. "On all counts." The prosecution began its case, laying out the events of that night 3 weeks ago with methodical precision. They called Sheriff Hollis first, who testified to the arrest, the evidence collected, the confessions of the miners. When it was Crow's turn to cross-examine, he stood slowly, like a snake uncoiling. "Sheriff Hollis," he said, his voice smooth as honey, "you've known the defendant for how many years?" "5 or 6, Hollis said warily. "And in that time, has Mr. Hardwick ever been accused of any crime?" "No, but—" "No," Crow repeated. "In fact, hasn't Mr. Hardwick been a model citizen? Employing hundreds, contributing to the church, serving on the town council?" "He's done those things," Hollis admitted. "But that doesn't mean—" "Thank you, Sheriff." Crow dismissed him with a wave. No further questions. The prosecution called Ramon Garcia next. The young miner told his story clearly, describing how Hardwick had threatened them, coerced them into participating in the attack. Crow's cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Garcia, you work for the copper mine, correct?" "I did," Ramon said. "I quit after that night. Because you knew you'd be fired for your part in this alleged attack?" "No, because I couldn't work for a man who would do such things." "Or because you saw an opportunity," Crow suggested. "A chance to extort money from my client by fabricating these charges." "That's not true." Ramon's voice rose. The judge's gavel cracked. "Order, Mr. Garcia, answer the questions without outbursts." It went on like that through the morning. Each witness called, each testimony given, and each one picked apart by Crow's relentless questioning. By the lunch recess, Ezra could see the worry on the prosecutor's face. "He's good," Sarah whispered as they ate sandwiches in the shade of the courthouse. "Too good. Truth is still truth," Nasha said. No amount of clever words can change what happened, but the afternoon brought a new challenge. Crow called his first witness, a mine supervisor named Harold Jeffries, who testified that Hardwick was at the mine office the night of the attack, going over payroll records. "Are you certain?" Crow asked. "Absolutely," Jeffries said. "We worked until past midnight. Mr. Hardwick never left the building. It was a lie, and everyone who had been there that night knew it." But Jeffries told it with such conviction that Ezra saw doubt flicker across some of the jury's faces. The prosecution scrambled, calling Robert Hardwick to rebut the testimony. The young man looked fragile as he took the stand, his hand pressed to his chest where his lungs labored with each breath. "Mr. Hardwick," the prosecutor said gently, "can you tell the court where your father was on the night in question?" Robert looked at his father, and something painful passed between them. "He was at the North Canyon," Robert said clearly, "leading 10 men to burn down Nasha's trading post. I know because I was there, because I tried to stop him." The courtroom erupted. Hardwick leaped to his feet. "You ungrateful wretch! I gave you everything!" The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "Order, Mr. Hardwick, sit down or you'll be removed." But the damage was done. Robert had begun to cough, great racking spasms that brought blood to his lips. Sarah rushed forward despite the bailiff's protests, supporting Robert as he struggled to breathe. "I need to get him outside," Sarah said. "Please." "Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning," Judge Carson announced. 9 o'clock sharp. They carried Robert out into the afternoon air, laying him on a bench in the plaza. Nasha appeared with her medicine bag, working quickly to prepare a tincture that would ease his breathing. "You shouldn't have pushed yourself so hard," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I had to," Robert gasped between coughs. "I had to tell the truth." "You did," Ezra said, kneeling beside him. "You were brave." As Nasha worked and Robert's breathing slowly eased, Ezra noticed a crowd gathering. Not hostile, but curious. And in the front of that crowd stood a woman he recognized, Maggie Chen. "What that boy did in there," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Standing against his own father for what's right. That takes more courage than any of us have shown." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I've known Nasha for years," Maggie continued. "She healed my daughter when doctors said she would die. She's traded fairly with everyone. Never cheated, never stolen. And this is how we repay her, by letting men like Hardwick drive her from her home." "She's Apache," someone in the crowd said, but the words lacked conviction. "So what?" Maggie shot back. "Does that make her less human? Less deserving of justice?" More voices joined in, a debate that grew heated but mostly stayed civil. Ezra watched, fascinated, as public opinion seemed to shift right there in the plaza. Not everyone, not by a long shot, but enough. Enough to matter. That evening, back at the hotel where Hollis had secured them rooms, there was a knock on Nasha's door. Ezra answered it, finding a young Mexican woman holding a basket. "For Senora Nasha," she said, "from the people of Barrio Viejo, to show our support." Inside the basket were tortillas, beans, fresh vegetables, and a note written in Spanish. Nasha read it slowly, her eyes welling with tears. "What does it say?" Ezra asked. "That I am not alone," she whispered. "That they stand with me. That justice knows no borders and truth speaks all languages." More gifts arrived through the evening. Food mostly, but also flowers, a hand-sewn shawl, a small carved cross from the Mexican Catholic community, and a medicine bag from the Tohono O'odham people who live south of Tucson. By the time they went to bed, Nasha's room looked like a shrine to solidarity. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread, and now representatives from a dozen communities sat in the gallery. Mexican laborers, Chinese merchants, Tohono O'odham elders, white farmers and shopkeepers who had tired of Hardwick's bullying. When Judge Carson called the court to order, he looked out at the crowd with surprise. Then his gaze settled on Nasha, and he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something. The prosecution calls Nasha, wife of Chato, to the stand. Nasha stood, her back straight, her head high. She wore traditional Apache dress, deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, her long black hair braided with red cloth. She looked like what she was, a warrior, not a victim. She took the oath, her hand steady on the Bible, and sat down. The prosecutor began gently, establishing her identity, her history with the land, her attempts to resolve the dispute peacefully. Then he asked her to describe the night of the attack. Nasha spoke clearly, without embellishment or drama. She told the truth as it had happened, leaving nothing out. When Crow stood to cross-examine, the courtroom went silent. "Mrs. Chato," he began, deliberately mispronouncing her name. "Or should I say Mrs. Savage?" The courtroom gasped. Even the judge looked shocked. "Mr. Crow," Judge Carson said dangerously, "you will show respect in my court." "I apologize, Your Honor," Crow said, not sounding apologetic at all. "Let me rephrase. Miss Nasha, you claim to own this land by treaty right, but can you produce this treaty?" "It was burned," Nasha said, "when the cavalry attacked our camp in 1872. "How convenient," Crow said. "No treaty, no proof of ownership. For all we know, you're a squatter." "I have been on that land for 15 years, Nasha said. "I have paid taxes. I have title recognized by the territorial government." "Obtained through what means?" Crow pressed. "Through legal channels or through intimidation and violence?" "Through survival," Nasha said, and her voice rang like a bell. "Through outlasting men like you who think might makes right. Through being more stubborn than the desert itself." The courtroom burst into applause. Judge Carson's gavel couldn't stop it for a full minute. When order was finally restored, Crow tried a different tack. "Tell me about your husband," he said. "Chato. Was he not one of Geronimo's warriors?" "He was," Nasha said proudly. "And did he not participate in raids against white settlers?" "He defended his people against those who would exterminate us," Nasha said. "If that is a crime, then every soldier who fought in your white man's wars is equally guilty." More applause. The judge looked like he wanted to stop it, but couldn't quite bring himself to. Crow, seeing he was losing the room, made his final attempt. "Regardless of your past, isn't it true that you've made a good living from this land? That you profit handsomely from your trading post?" "I make enough to survive," Nasha said. "To eat, to maintain my home. Is that now a crime?" "No, but it does call into question your motives for refusing Mr. Hardwick's generous offer." "My motive is simple," Nasha said, and now she looked directly at the jury. "That land is all I have left of my husband, my son, my people. It is where they are buried. It is where their spirits live. And I will not sell my dead for any amount of money." The silence that followed was profound. "No further questions," Crow said quietly, and sat down. The trial continued through the afternoon. The Garcia brothers testified again, this time with more confidence. Tommy spoke about what he'd seen. Even Cochi took the stand, speaking in Apache with Nasha translating, telling the court about the importance of ancestral lands. But it was Ezra's testimony that seemed to resonate most with the jury. Perhaps because he was a white man with no stake in the outcome except justice. Perhaps because his story of being saved by the woman Crow had tried to paint as savage undermined every stereotype. She didn't have to help me, Ezra said. I was a stranger, a white man dying in her desert. She could have walked past. Instead, she saved my life. She fed me. She gave me shelter. And when men came to destroy her home, she defended it not with savagery, but with intelligence and restraint. He looked at Hardwick. That man wanted to burn her out, to destroy everything she had. And why? Because she wouldn't sell. Because she dared to say no. If that's not tyranny, I don't know what is. When both sides had rested, Judge Carson addressed the jury. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. Now you must decide. Did Cornelius Hardwick attempt to commit the crimes he's charged with? Did he abuse his power and position to intimidate and destroy? The jury filed out. The courtroom emptied into the plaza to wait. It took 4 hours. The sun was setting when the bailiff called everyone back inside. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Carson asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreman said. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom exploded. Some cheered. Some shouted in protest. Hardwick simply collapsed, as if all the air had gone out of him. When order was restored, Judge Carson pronounced sentence. 20 years in territorial prison. Restitution of $5,000 to the victim. And permanent injunction against Arizona Copper Company acquiring the disputed land through any means. And the McCall brothers? Maggie asked Sheriff Hollis later that evening as they gathered to celebrate. 10 years each, Hollis said. Dutch Keller got 15 for his prior crimes. The minors who cooperated got probation. He shook his head. Justice isn't perfect, but it's something. Nasha sat perfectly still, as if unable to believe it was over. Ezra reached over and took her hand. You won, he said. We won, she corrected. All of us. As they left the courthouse, the plaza erupted in celebration. Mexican families brought out guitars. Chinese merchants set off firecrackers. The Tohono O'odham elders sang a blessing song. And in the center of it all, Nasha stood with Ezra beside her, surrounded by a community that had found its voice. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. And for the first time in 2 years, Nasha allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could be brighter than the past. 6 months passed like seasons turning, each one bringing its own gifts and challenges. Winter came to the Chiricahua Mountains, not with the snow and ice of Tennessee, but with cool nights and crisp mornings that made the desert bloom in unexpected ways. Ezra had never seen anything like it, the way the land transformed when the rains finally came. Wildflowers erupted from soil that had seemed dead, painting the valleys in waves of gold and purple and red. The trading post had changed too. What had been Nasha's solitary outpost had become something more, a gathering place for the community that had formed around the trial. The forge that Ezra had built now did steady business, enough that he'd taken on Tommy Whitehorse as an apprentice. The boy had a natural talent for metalwork, his hands quick and sure, his eye for detail remarkable. On this particular morning in early March of 1886, Ezra stood at the anvil, showing Tommy how to fold steel for a knife blade. The technique required patience, heating and hammering, and folding the metal over and over until it achieved the strength and flexibility needed for a blade that would last generations. Like this, Ezra said, demonstrating the angle of the hammer strike. You're not forcing the metal, you're persuading it. You're working with its nature, not against it. Tommy nodded, his young face serious with concentration. He took the hammer, and his first few strikes were tentative. But as he found his rhythm, Ezra could see the transformation. The boy was becoming a smith. From the trading post, Nasha emerged carrying 2 cups of coffee, a morning ritual that had developed over the months. She handed one to Ezra, and their fingers touched briefly. Such small moments of contact had become common between them, each one building on the last, creating a connection that felt both new and ancient. The Garcia brothers are coming today, she said. They want to commission tools for their new venture. Their own mine? Ezra asked. He'd heard rumors that Ramon and Felipe were planning to stake a claim in the hills north of the trading post, working silver deposits that the big companies had overlooked. Not a mine, Nasha said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A cooperative. 20 families pooling resources, sharing profits equally. They're calling it La Esperanza, the hope. That's ambitious, Ezra said. That's the future, Nasha replied. People working together instead of being exploited by men like Hardwick. She took a sip of her coffee. Maggie Chen is investing too, in some of the Tohono O'odham families. It was the kind of thing that would have been impossible a year ago, Ezra reflected, before the trial, before people had seen what could happen when communities stood together instead of apart. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast but not with urgency. As the figure drew closer, Ezra recognized Sarah, her blonde hair catching the morning sun. She visited less frequently now that she and Robert had married in a quiet ceremony 2 months prior, but she still came regularly, maintaining the connection with her brother that had been so nearly lost. She dismounted with practiced ease, no longer the sheltered girl from Tennessee, but a woman who had learned the rhythms of the desert. Robert sends his regards, she said, embracing Ezra. He's working on the new clinic today. The walls are going up faster than expected. That was another change. Robert Hardwick, disowned by his father but freed from his father's shadow, had used his inheritance from his mother's side of the family to fund a clinic for miners and their families. Free medical care, regardless of ability to pay. Nasha served as one of the healers there, teaching others the Apache methods that had saved Robert's own life. How is he? Nasha asked. His lungs. Better every day, Sarah said. Whatever you did with those herbs, it's working. The doctor from Tucson examined him last week and couldn't believe the improvement. He said it's the first time he's seen consumption go into remission like this. Robert still has to be careful, but he can work now. He can live. The land provides, Nasha said simply, if you know how to listen to it. They walked together into the trading post, where Nasha had prepared a meal. It was another morning ritual, breaking bread together, sharing stories, building the bonds that made them more than neighbors. They made them family. As they ate, Sarah pulled a letter from her bag. This came for you, she said, handing it to Ezra. From Tennessee. Your old apprentice, I think. Ezra opened it carefully, reading the neat script. His former apprentice, a young man named Daniel, was writing to say that he'd taken over Ezra's forge back home and was doing well. Business was steady, the town was thriving. And then at the end, a question. When are you coming home? Ezra folded the letter slowly, aware that both women were watching him. What will you tell him? Sarah asked. Ezra looked around the trading post, at the walls lined with tools he'd made and goods Nasha had traded, at the forge visible through the window, smoke rising from its chimney, at Nasha herself, strong and beautiful and somehow both foreign and familiar. I'll tell him I am home, Ezra said. An emotion flickered in Nasha's eyes, quick as lightning but just as powerful. She turned away, ostensibly to pour more coffee, but not before Ezra saw what was written there. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd known this was coming long before he did. Then it's time we talked about the future, she said. Robert and I have been discussing something. A proposal. What kind of proposal? Nasha asked, returning with the coffee pot. Sarah set down her cup, suddenly serious. The clinic is only the beginning. Robert wants to do more. He's been talking with the territorial governor about establishing a school, not just for white children, but for everyone. Mexican, Apache, Tohono O'odham, Chinese. A real school where children learn together. That's a beautiful dream, Nasha said, but dreams need money. Robert has some, Sarah said, and we've been promised grants from church groups in the East. But we need land, good land, with water. She looked at Nasha. We were hoping you might consider selling a portion of your property. The northern section, near the spring. The room went very quiet. Ezra knew what Nasha had said at the trial, that she would never sell her land, that it was all she had left of her dead. But Nasha surprised him. Tell me more about this school, she said. Sarah leaned forward, her enthusiasm building. Classes in English, Spanish, and Apache. Teachers who respect all cultures. Practical skills like farming and smithing alongside reading and arithmetic. A place where children learn that different doesn't mean less. And who would run it? Nasha asked. We were hoping you would help, Sarah said. Teaching traditional skills, medicine, the old ways, making sure Apache knowledge isn't lost. Nasha stood, walking to the window that looked out over her land. Ezra could see her shoulders tense, the internal battle being fought. My husband and son are buried near that spring, she said quietly. Their graves are there, I know, Sarah said gently. We thought, that maybe that's exactly why it's the right place, so that children playing and learning would honor them, so that death becomes not an ending, but part of the cycle that brings new life. Nasha turned, and Ezra saw tears on her face, the first he'd seen since the night of the attack. You would build a school on the graves of Apache warriors? We would build a school that teaches children to be as brave and honorable as those warriors were, Sarah said, where their legacy lives on. We'd even like to name it after them, the Chado and Anna Memorial School, honoring both your loss and Ezra's. Ezra felt his breath catch. Anna, his wife's name, spoken here in the desert, woven into a future he was building with Nasha. Silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. Then Nasha nodded, a single sharp dip of her head. Yes, she said, yes, we will do this. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Surveyors came to map the land. Architects drew plans for a building that would be both functional and beautiful, incorporating design elements from all the cultures it would serve. The community rallied, donating labor and materials. Ezra found himself at the center of it, forging iron for the school's framework, teaching others how to work metal so they could help. It reminded him of barn raisings back in Tennessee, the way a community could come together to build a future larger than any one person could achieve alone. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Ezra and Nasha sat on the bench outside the trading post, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. I never thought I'd do it, Nasha said. Sell even a piece of this land. You didn't sell it, Ezra said. You invested it in the future. She was quiet for a moment. Chato would have approved, she said. He always said that clinging too tightly to the past meant you couldn't embrace the future. She looked at Ezra. I think I'm finally understanding what he meant. Ezra took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months. I need to ask you something, he said. Nasha turned to face him, and in the dying light, her scar looked like a river of gold across her face. These past months, working beside you, building a future together, I've come to realize that I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. He took a breath. I know it's complicated. I know we come from different worlds. But I also know that my world is better with you in it. Ezra Brennan, Nasha said, and there was amusement in her voice. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if you'd consider it, Ezra said. I know it wouldn't be easy. There would be people who wouldn't approve, who would make our lives difficult. There are always such people, Nasha said. The question is whether we live our lives for them or for ourselves. So is that a yes? Nasha smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger, lighter, as if years of burden had lifted. In my culture, she said, when a man wants to marry a woman, he must bring gifts to her family. He must prove he can provide, that he's worthy. I don't have much, Ezra admitted. A forge, some tools, the clothes on my back. You have something more valuable, Nasha said. You have a good heart. You have hands that create rather than destroy. You have the courage to stand for what's right even when it's hard. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. Yes, Ezra Brennan, I will marry you. They kissed then, a gentle meeting of lips that promised more than passion. It promised partnership. It promised a future built on mutual respect and shared dreams. The wedding was planned for the spring equinox, a date that held significance for both their cultures. A time of balance when day and night were equal, when the old year gave way to the new. The preparations brought the community together in new ways. Maggie Chen organized the women to sew a wedding dress that blended Apache and European styles, deerskin decorated with Chinese silk and Mexican embroidery. Kochi and the Apache elders prepared traditional ceremonies. The Mexican families planned the feast. The white families from town, those who had come to respect Nasha through the trial, offered the church for the Christian portion of the ceremony. It would be a wedding that honored all traditions, rejecting none. The night before the wedding, as was customary, Ezra and Nasha spent the evening apart. Ezra found himself at the forge with Tommy and the Garcia brothers, working on a final gift for his bride. A knife, the blade folded steel that he'd been working on for months, the handle carved from ironwood and inlaid with turquoise. "This is the finest work you've ever done," Ramon said, examining the blade. "It has to be," Ezra said. "It's for her." Tommy was polishing the handle, his young face serious with the responsibility. "She'll love it," he said. "It's beautiful and practical." "That's Nasha." Ezra smiled. The boy was right. Nasha had no use for things that were merely ornamental, but something beautiful that also served a purpose, that she would treasure. As they worked, talk turned to the future. The school was nearly complete, ready to open its doors in the fall. The cooperative mine was producing steady silver, not enough to make anyone rich, but enough to provide security for 20 families. The clinic was treating dozens of patients a week, saving lives that would have been lost a year ago. "Things are changing," Felipe said. "For the better, I think. Because people like you and Nasha showed us it was possible," Ramon added. "You stood up when it would have been easier to walk away. That inspired others to stand too." "We just did what was right," Ezra said. "That's all any of us can do," Tommy said with the simple wisdom of youth. "But imagine if everyone did it." Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Ezra found Tommy staring at the school building in the distance. "You'll be one of the first students there," Ezra said. "And one day maybe you'll teach there too. Pass on what you've learned." Tommy smiled. "Metalwork and Apache stories. The old ways and the new." "Exactly," Ezra said. "That's the future." Across the compound, in the trading post, Nasha was having her own preparations. Sarah and Maggie worked on her hair, braiding it with red cloth and silver beads. The wedding dress hung on the wall, and Nasha kept looking at it with wonder. "I never thought I'd wear such a thing again," she said. "After Chato died, I thought that part of my life was over." "Life has a way of surprising us," Sarah said, weaving another bead into the braid. "When I left Tennessee, I thought I was running away. Instead, I was running toward everything I needed." Maggie nodded. "When my husband died 20 years ago, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. But I found family in this community. Not blood family, but chosen family. Sometimes that's even stronger." Nasha touched the dress, her calloused fingers gentle on the soft leather. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good wife? What if I've been alone too long to remember how to share my life?" "You'll remember," Sarah said. "Love is like learning to walk. At first you stumble, but eventually it becomes as natural as breathing." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The sky, that particular shade of blue that only desert skies achieve. The ceremony would take place at the spring where Chato and her son were buried, the same land that would soon hold a school. Guests began arriving before sunrise. Mexican families in their Sunday best, Chinese merchants in traditional silk, Apache families who had traveled from the reservation, risking trouble with the authorities to be there, white families from Tucson and Dos Cabezas. Even Sheriff Hollis came, his badge polished to a shine. Kochi led the Apache ceremony as the sun rose, speaking in the old language, blessing the couple with smoke from burning sage. He called upon the four directions, asking the spirits to guide and protect this union. Before Robert spoke the final words, Kochi stepped forward one last time. He was smiling, his ancient face radiant in the morning sun. "The spirits are pleased," he said in Apache, Nasha translating softly. "Two broken pieces have become one strong whole. May your children be many, your days be long, and your love be the fire that never dies." He placed his weathered hand on their joined hands, and for a moment Ezra felt energy pass between them, something ancient and powerful and true. Then Robert, now strong enough to stand for extended periods, led the Christian ceremony, reading from Corinthians about love's patience and kindness. Nasha and Ezra stood before him, hands clasped, and spoke vows that promised fidelity, respect, and partnership. "I promise to honor your past while building our future," Ezra said, "to respect your traditions while sharing mine, to stand beside you in joy and in struggle, in plenty and in want, for all the days I'm given. I promise to trust you with my heart, which I thought was too broken to give again," Nasha said, "to build a home with you that welcomes all who need shelter, to forge a life where our differences make us stronger, not weaker." Maggie Chen stepped forward then, wrapping a red silk cord around their joined hands, a Chinese tradition symbolizing the red thread of fate that connects those meant to be together. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, Robert said, his voice strong and clear, I pronounce you husband and wife. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the canyon walls. Music started, guitars and fiddles and Chinese erhus blending in a melody that belonged to no single culture but to all of them. The feast that followed was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Tables laden with food from every tradition. Mexican tamales beside Apache acorn bread. Chinese dumplings next to American apple pie. Everyone eating together, laughing together, celebrating together. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, dancing began. Nasha and Ezra moved through the crowd, thanking guests, accepting congratulations, marveling at how their lives had changed. Tommy found them as the stars began to emerge. I have something for you, he said, pulling out a small wrapped bundle. I made it myself. Well, mostly myself. Ezra helped with the hard parts. Inside was a horseshoe, perfectly forged, with their initials worked into the iron. For luck, Tommy said. For your new home together. Thank you, Nasha said, pulling the boy into an embrace. You honor us. As the celebration continued into the night, Ezra and Nasha slipped away, walking up to the ridge that overlooked the valley. Below them, lantern light danced like fireflies. Music drifted up on the evening breeze, and in the distance, the silhouette of the nearly completed school stood against the starlit sky. A year ago, I was dying in the desert, Ezra said, alone, certain I'd failed at everything that mattered. And I was alone in my trading post, Nasha said, believing that my life was over, that all I had left was survival. Ezra pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. Look what we built, he said. Not just a marriage, but a community, a future. Our children will learn in that school, Nasha said. Children of all colors, all backgrounds, learning together. Growing together. Our children? Ezra said, pulling back to look at her face. Nasha smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed her. I'm 48 years old, she said. The healers say it's unlikely, but life has surprised us before. And if we're not blessed with our own, we have Tommy. We have all the children who will come to that school. We can be parents to all of them. That sounds perfect, Ezra said. They stood together under the vast Arizona sky, two people who had been broken by loss and remade by love. Behind them lay pain and grief and everything they'd survived. Before them lay possibility and hope in a future they would build together. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and the promise of rain. And for the first time in years, both Nasha and Ezra felt peace. Not because life would be easy. They knew better than that. There would be challenges ahead, prejudice to overcome, difficulties to face. But they would face them together. And that made all the difference. As they walked back down to the celebration, hand in hand, the sound of laughter and music growing louder with each step, Ezra realized something profound. He had come west searching for his sister, for family, for something to fill the emptiness Anna's death had left behind. And he had found all of that and more. He had found a home, not in a place but in the woman beside him, in the community they had helped build, in the future they were creating together. The hammer that had shaped iron for 30 years would now shape a different kind of legacy. Not in metal, but in lives touched, in bridges built between cultures, in love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, as the desert bloomed in the unexpected spring, as two hearts beat as one, the story that had begun with a rescue in the burning sand found its true ending. Not in death or defeat, but in life and hope, and the simple, powerful truth that sometimes the greatest journeys lead us not to where we thought we were going, but to exactly where we needed to be all along. Home.